Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Silvio Frank Pupo Casco. I'm Miami born and raised native, proud to be here in Florida, and proud to be presenting today at Florida Climate Week. Now, after 10 years of starting Logos Capital during Occupy Wall Street, looking for a more complete way to account for the reality of the world that we live in today, understanding that we can have even more profit if we put people and planet first over the long haul, then we would all be not just in a sustainable world, but in a regenerative world, one that truly leaves the planet better than we found it. But how do we do that? Well, it's not just accounting, but accountability. So today, I want to talk to you about exactly what that journey has been like and what I've been able to learn that can help us accomplish this reality. To start, it's not going to be easy. Systems change is super complex, complicated, and requires lots of coordination, effort, political will, and, well, a number of things. But now, to not bore you and to not keep this conversation too technical, because it definitely will be technical, I want to be able to inspire you to understand why we should care and why we need to start with climate accounting and collaboration for climate accounting to get this mission accomplished. Now, in order to explain this topic, I'm going to have Dr. Martin Weinstein of Yale University and the Open Earth Foundation share his thoughts.
Earth was born 4.5 billion years ago. Its atmosphere was 100% CO2. The radiation from the sun would kill everything. Eventually, the oceans form, life begins. It finds an amazing source of energy, the sun. As photosynthesis evolves, life started creating its own protective layer for more life to emerge. It took billions of years to make this planet very welcoming to life. In the last 60 years, we are significantly reversing that balance. In 2015, the world leaders came together to agree on what our targets need to be to curb catastrophic impacts of climate change. The translation now is doing that.
We still see a huge 30 gigaton gap between national government policies and where the science tells us that we need to go. And that gap is just widening.
In a fragmented space where we can't trust the numbers, how do we trust what is actually happening at the Earth level? And this is not just about accounting. It's about accountability.
I started to look at what kinds of technologies and innovations might be out there to help us address this problem of data gaps in climate change policy. And that's when I stumbled upon blockchain.
Now, in really simple terms, the idea of blockchain is just to kind of decentralize your data storage.
You have certification processes that are transparent. So you can say, how do I know so many kilowatts were created at this point in time? Well, I can actually run an algorithm and then I can put it on a blockchain. Other person can look at it and replicate that and say, yes, that's true. You eliminate the need for a third party. So that's the transparency of it all. That's the big deal if you can do that at scale.
It's not just decentralized in its computational and its record-keeping system. It's decentralized on how people collaborate and contribute to it.
Everyone at Yale, where I was based at the time, said you have to speak with Martin Weinstein. You two are like minds and you'll just totally hit it off.
At Yale, I proposed an open innovation lab. We've hosted our first open climate collabathon, where we invited teams around the world not to compete against each other, but to build different pieces of the same integrated climate accounting system. And presenting that at the Conference of the Parties, COP25 in Madrid, my peers and people that I engaged through at COP, they responded with, yes, we've been needing this for years. And the validation that no one was tackling and building this as holistically as we had set it up was a massive inspiration for the design and launch of the Open Earth Foundation. As a totally independent entity,
that sounded incredibly exciting to really think differently about the Earth's grand challenges, including climate change and oceans, and the role that digital innovation and technology can play.
There's something special in the work we're doing that I don't think anyone else is doing.
Open Earth is really unique. The radical collaboration in being a team of teams and pulling together the experts from very diverse parts of the ecosystem of climate change solutions and the ecosystem of climate tech.
You don't feel egos when you sit in a meeting. We listen with intent and communicate with transparency.
It's about how do we radically and openly collaborate with other people so that they can use our outputs, we can use their outputs, and together we can solve these challenges.
How do you motivate everyone around the world to move away from a fossil-based economy to a sustainable economy and to an equitable economy? That's a huge challenge. So you need to create a digital infrastructure.
We can't do that through one single web platform. We have to create a platform of platforms.
Part of our work as building platforms is actually building communities. As we increase the community, we have more diversity, we have better perspectives, we have more visions, and this is a planetary goal, and we need the planet working towards this.
There's extremely valuable databases, accounting mechanisms, markets already out there, but they don't necessarily talk to each other. We have to bring them together.
We can leverage this whole network of the Internet of Things, or IoT, to get the data that we desperately need to understand how far or close are we to meeting our climate change goals.
Then you can have like emissions data on the whole world, right? Because every sensor is reporting at the same time.
We're able to combine getting the data, building those advanced models, and applying it to predict things about the future that will help decision making, that will help policymakers.
By coming up with a totally automated system that can incorporate real streams of data, be able to actually get a sense in almost near real time of how the planet is doing on climate change emissions.
Collaborating towards a more resilient planet, it involves climate accounting, but it also involves climate financing.
How do we finance climate action at the community level in a way that it becomes frictionless?
Part of the first tools we've built is a pilot in Puerto Rico to test IoT sensors that measure the results of installing solar panels.
We used smart sensors in order to document what energy was actually generated. Then we used AI and machine learning to verify that the data is actually correct. And then blockchain here works as like a reporting layer, and then also to disseminate the returns of the project. And once we have scaled these smaller projects, you can bundle them up and make them investable for bigger funds. So you actually create entirely new financial mechanisms around these projects.
If we fail, the climate impacts we're facing will not compare with what is yet to come. Putting entire nations underwater, species lost, ecosystems destroyed, and the inability of the planet to regenerate itself.
There are all these things that suddenly are going to come crashing in on us, and there has to be a solution. There has to be an alternative.
The big evolutionary step is for us to realize how deeply interconnected we are, to create a level of unity we haven't seen before. In our work, in our collaboration, in our partnerships, in our actions, we will achieve the future we want when we realize that Earth comes first.
Wow. Well, couldn't say that any better. So I think that this is really integral to understand the why, the who, the technology, and the importance of why exactly it's so critical to use emerging technology and tech like artificial intelligence to get these things done with AI and blockchain and Internet of Things. It's complex, but it's not that complicated. Of exactly what does this mean? How do we accomplish climate accounting? And some of the important concepts that are integral for us to be able to move in that direction, thinking about top down, and more importantly, bottom up from a grassroots level, so that each one of you can start to implement these things in your own communities, in your own homes, in your own buildings, in your own cities, in your own states, in your own countries, and why that's the way to go. Now, this is what that system looks like. This iteration of a climate portal and an open portal really is integral to get everybody motivated on an individual level to get involved. So we're looking at ways of gamifying this. Yeah, gamifying. Make it fun for people to be able to go out, tag either trees or corals or mangroves or whatever the case might be that can help us understand what natural capital assets we have. And use this data and as much sensors and data and advanced emerging technologies as we can to be able to create almost a near real-time digital twin of the planet so we can get a better understanding of what it is. In the bottom part here, and I know it's a convoluted slide, you'll see the climate system, the Earth system, the global inventories of the planet. What are the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports that are required to be able to feed into the reporting that was agreed during the Paris COP21, the climate agreement that happened in Paris. And that means in your second phase, this nested accounting system, exactly where you see it there, involves non-state, subnational, and national actors all feeding into each other. And here where it gets interesting. Smart cities and smart sensors and all the other implications that are necessary for that through what's called the MRV methodologies, which would be for monitoring, reporting, and verification. Ultimately, using this data to be able to create the types of climate assets that are necessary for us to prove the impact that we're creating, the offsets that we're creating, and the issues that need to be solved. And ultimately, recreating the financial mechanisms and systems and marketplaces that can allow us to fund those solutions, which then we would have all the data available to know exactly the kind of impact that they would create. So why not fund those kind of solutions that we know are going to be able to make a great impact? One of the key and fundamental things to be able to accomplish this is this nested climate accounting system, right? This is one of the first fundamental things that we need to open with in Open Climate. Talking about climate systems, it's absolutely integral to understand this nested accounting concept. And really, it starts with thinking about the neighborhood, our home, our individual buildings, the project that's actually happening and taking place. So let's think about the example of a renewable energy plant or any other similar project. In the case of that, whether it's a tree planting as an intervention, the project needs to report into a company. This company maybe into the city, right? And those cities would then be reporting into, let's say, the state, right? So if city of Miami, city of Coral Gables, Fort Lauderdale, Orlando, Ocala, Tampa, it starts to take stock of what's happening with their climate. They all roll into each other, cities into state, state into regions, regions into country. And then this is what allows the United Nations to come together for this global stock take of exactly what it is and where it is that the planet is. So, does that make sense? Let me know if you guys have any questions on this. I'm going to have my email in the end of the presentation so that you guys can send me any note on what you might be thinking. The second, importantly, a critical element is that not only do we have to take stock at a local level and nest these things in, but we also have to think about, well, what are the standards that we're using to be able to take stock, right? And what are the protocols that we're using? What's the common language that's being used to be able to make this? And there are a lot of incredible actors that are really important, like Yale Open, MIT, that are working on these efforts together with the Collabathon that Dr. Martin was talking about earlier. And this is where a lot of conversation is being had. And COP26 was supposed to be the big meeting where people would be able to get into deeper understanding of what those standards should be, particularly when it comes to things like carbon credits or being able to account for that carbon and the action units. But to simplify this concept and thinking about, right, how this would work, each climate unit would have a methodology on it. The methodology would be backed by the corresponding data that we would provide through the advanced technologies and sensors that feed into that. And that protocol would create a certificate that proves the impact of the climate action that needs to happen. This gives you the Open Climate Protocol and framework. All the different actors would coalesce around this, and ultimately they would take stock, of any of the credits and or the debits that are necessary from a carbon perspective. How exactly does that work? Well, that's where the MRV comment was, right? Remember what I showed you a bit earlier, this red section of climate action, right? That red section is, uses things like Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, data oracles to monitor, report, and verify the digital transformation of the assets and how we prove the climate assets are there. and ultimately feed and certify that information into the climate markets to allow us to process and verify and validate all that. To make this possible, of course, everybody in every community has to have their platform and their ways to do it. And interoperability is incredibly important and incredibly difficult. And that's why a platform of platforms needs to be made. The same thing was proposed with the Miami-Dade Beacon Council in Smart Florida about 5 years ago. We were working with Matthew on this initiative to create a smart city. And what we determined and found out was that you do need a platform of platforms that helps with integration. And this is the great call to action. We need each and every one of you out there to help us with this mission, to gamify and be rewarded for helping us take stock and integrate all the information and databases that are out there with different data. In the case of, let's say, something as simple as Miami Biscayne Bay, right? You have all these stakeholders and all these actors in Florida International University and University of Miami and other universities that are involved, and all of them doing different research, all of them doing different interventions and projects and initiatives and goals and reporting and samplings, but it's all disparate and it needs to be interconnected. And so we desperately need to bring this integration as one of the milestones of how we're going to be able to accomplish this kind of stuff. And that's what's going to enable climate accounting. But what exactly is climate accounting in the climate market? Well, like I said earlier, it's basically a debit and credits system when it comes to our greenhouse gas emissions. There are a number of things that could be considered part of this climate accounting. Emissions are part of it, mitigations are part of it. And of course, we just had our hurricane. So, adaptations are incredibly important. Pledges that we take individually, as an individual, as an organization, as a city, as a country, and of course, ways to finance those solutions and the projects that are going to help us move towards those net zero and regeneration. Now, thinking about emissions and mitigations, you think about the voluntary markets, right? And here we can see that carbon accounting, when it comes to emissions and mitigations, is effectively the talking about this need of climate markets and policy. And in the climate markets, right, you have the UNFCCC, this CCC Paris Agreement, which is saying, hey guys, we got to do something about this to make sure that we don't go 2 degrees too many over in the wrong direction, which, by the way, would be devastating for Miami, where I'm today. And we need to think about particularly Article 6. And Article 6 of the Paris Agreement is what talks about cooperation for the climate markets. COP26 is where there are going to be more negotiations about how do you account in the climate markets and the compliance at a subnational, national, and international level. And a subnational level, you can see, and we'll get into this example, of how it is that others, for example, use renewable energy credits as a standard for portfolios and how you grow those portfolios. China had an emissions trading scheme that they launched, and that's a national level example of compliance for the climate markets. And internationally, you have, of course, the Kyoto Clean Development Mechanism. For those of you that might remember, right, in Kyoto was where the original concept of carbon credits and the need for carbon credits was birthed. We'll get into that a little bit later. Now, how does this make sense, right? Let's give you an example. If everybody met in Kyoto, everybody met in Paris, everybody's together. Now, what do we do? Okay, well, let's give you an example from our friend Martin's home country, right? Martin, you were able to see, he was born in Argentina, got his PhD in Australia, and you can see that Australia maybe underperformed according to its nationally determined contribution to the global commons. This is where Article 6 talks about these ITMOs, International Transfer of Mitigation Outcomes. Places like Argentina have lots of forests, lots of land, and they have this a way to capture and proving, hey, we're actually going above anything that we need to be contributing to the planet to be able to mitigate some of these issues on emissions. And so now, because you have the climate accounting and the nested accounting at the country level, Argentina and Australia are able to balance each other out to understand exactly where and what is needed for us to arrive towards this net zero, while also creating the right mechanisms to transact. An example at a national level are the renewable energy certificates that are happening in the US. This map right here is still pretty old. I think it might have been from the maybe about a decade ago. But you can see that different groups have different ways of measuring and using and trading the renewable energy credits. Today, there is not one integrated national system for these RECs to be traded. So you need to think about, right, just another example of the importance of creating an integration that's local, national, and international for us to keep sharing the data and allow the mechanics and mechanisms to collaborate and exchange the value of creating these things. So that's why we have to network markets, right? What do you mean? Well, you have to network the market so you can create this integrated accounting necessary. And all of the accounting ultimately is geared and is about planet Earth. You have the non-market carbon accounting, emissions inventory, and all of this, right, to motivate further these climate markets. And by the way, Florida is sitting on a huge amount of assets that if we would be able to work together to account for, we could probably monetize and have new sources of revenue to protect, preserve, and regenerate our natural assets. Now, natural assets, as you guys know, trees, forests, oceans, lakes, right? These commons, these are assets of the commons. And these public goods are no different in terms of the digital infrastructure that we need to build, as is the case here in the proposal of having a statewide international platform that allows us to share this and use this common accounting infrastructure as a digital public good that can serve everybody. And this is how we're able to collectively build the climate internet of things. Now, it's not just a good idea, and we haven't already just all agreed to get this done. It's also, as of this year, a presidential mandate in order for us to understand exactly and take stock exactly of what our assets truly are. Earlier this year, President Biden passed the new national strategy to reflect natural assets on America's balance sheet. Now, this is all about the planet's water, soil, and assets and what kind of critical role that they play, which we have yet to really fully understand. Now, that being said, it's not just about climate change. It's about resilience, especially in Florida, to understand what these assets are. And we'll get into some of these examples and things that we should be paying attention here in Florida. And further to resilience is the ability and the opportunity that comes with creating regenerative finance and regenerative economics. And to make refi possible, regenerative finance possible, we need to have this natural capital be government-wide, which is exactly finally happening. These are going to be able to measure the economic value that the natural resources provide to society and illustrate the robust economy that we live in today is based on the fragility of these nature-based ecosystems for us to survive, right? People that are maybe going to Miami Beach are enjoying themselves in the beautiful Florida beaches from Panama City Beach to Jacksonville to Daytona and Tampa. Well, so if we are not taking care of our environment and we have fish kill and we have red tide and we have all these terrible things that are happening to our environment, how is a business going to be able to thrive? Well, it can't and it won't. And that's why it's so important for us to really take stock of these things. This exercise collectively will help us understand the statistics to make better environmental economic decisions and perhaps really understand that our GDP system needs to be updated and drive a new growth rate, create the new economic engine for growth through climate and the regeneration of the planet. It'll be able to create a framework that allows us to find investment opportunities as well as shed light on other environmental dependencies. Now, we were able to see during the recent catastrophe that a lot of communities in West Florida that didn't have mangroves were completely destroyed, right? It didn't depend just on the new building code or the old building code, right, on new homes or old homes. Every time that mangrove forests existed, homes were protected, even the older homes that were built on lower standards of construction code. To think about this opportunity is a massive business opportunity for us to consider taking stock of something like natural capital assets of mangroves, for example. Mangroves and the mangrove forest, by the way, one of the largest contingencies of mangrove forest being here in South Florida, It can sequester up to 400% more than land-based tropical rainforests. Now, if we're going to take stock and move towards net zero and our net zero commitments, our largest carbon sequestration assets are already right there. We need to be able to capture and prove the value that they're creating, right? As you also might see, the Army Corps of Engineers, with their $6 billion seawall, have now agreed to allow local solutions to be implemented, right? And I think nature-based solutions for preventing and diffusing things in waves, oscillations, and hurricanes, corals and mangroves are at the front of the line of not just helping diffuse to create more resilient coastlines and preserve the coastlines, but also an incredible amount of economic benefit that will continue to be provided to the locals and to the insurance companies and to the government and to the residents and to the investors of our communities and our state. Now, that being said, I want to focus on this opportunity of mangroves. Mangroves in Florida can protect us and be profitable along the way. So that's just to paint a picture for you, right? And I think that this is one of the first calls to action that we want to take, right, as Logos Capital and the Logos Blue Economy Foundation, to gather all the partners and players and create urban as well as rural areas of mapping in high fidelity the natural capital assets that we have in our mangroves. The blue economy is a massive business opportunity for the state of Florida. The ocean shot is the moonshot of our generation. To do this, we need a full spectrum approach to get towards climate finance, not just philanthropy through the foundation, incubation and acceleration, being able to work with our partners to be able to grow startups and startup ideas, pilot these solutions, finance and fund these solutions, and then scale these solutions through things like our Blue Fund and Blue Bonds, ultimately, to take these assets even public in the market so they can be freely traded, much like forests might be traded in a market and create more monetization and more profitability for the people that are already protecting the forest, most being indigenous communities. And when we think about climate accounting as a necessary to enable climate finance, these are different examples of, for example, how we can finance ocean solutions and how different areas of the full spectrum of capital, from concessionary capital to debt and equity, can have the greatest amount of impact in different natural capitals, commodities, and marine and coastal development areas. Now, this is a little model of what we think that might look like. And more importantly, I'd like to bring your attention to thinking about more creative ways to be able to get involved, right? And what we did last year was, with Open Earth, worked on the Open Ocean project and started to creating digital twins and NFTs, non-fungible tokens, that can be representations of these natural capital assets that we are looking to bring forth and protect and regenerate. Now, what do I mean by these NFTs? Some of you may or may not know about NFTs. And so I'll just do a little example here. You go to Logos Blue Dot Foundation, you'll see some of the art that we put together. And the idea was very much like the Tom's 1-for-1 model. Every time we sell an NFT, we plant a coral, right? And not just that, but use the metadata associated to who planted it, Greg Taffet, where they planted it, right? With what organizations, what's the geolocation, right? A lot of geo information systems and spatial information systems and new standards are going to be created, right? Of like the internet for the physical and the built environment that are going to help us get into more detail and more verifications in creating these digital twins of our natural capital assets. The idea is here that you buy one of these, let's say these NFTs, then you really be able to support the planting of one coral. Here you can see during Art Basel last year, where we put one of our coral drop NFTs on display in a holograph device. And this holographic device really allowed us to just take the art to another level. So this is, I think, our call to action. I believe that's an incredibly critical goal for us to think about how we're going to be able to accomplish these things. And it requires that everybody be involved for us to really be able to accomplish this, right? If we don't have everyone involved, we're not going to be able to move the needle enough. So we really need your involvement, your support, whether you're in academia or you're a donor or you're an investor or you're a politician or you're an NGO, especially NGOs. There is incredible value to be created and generated and captured from getting involved and helping us fulfill this mission of climate accounting and prove climate finance as a vehicle for change and a vehicle for good. I'm leaving my contact information below. My call to action is, remember, we need everybody's support to be able to account for the climate. When we can do that, we'll be able to have the verification and validation to know the value that it provides and be able to provide the climate finance that will make regenerative finance a reality. We are the regeneration generation. It is up to us, each and every one of us, to make this possible, and we can't do it without you. Please reach out, get involved, and help us on this important mission for planet Earth. Thank you.